This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
What do you guys want to talk about?
So what do you guys think it'll be? 5 stars? 5 1/4? 5 3/4? What is Meltzer Magoo's unbiased journalism going to bring to the table this time? Lord only knows. Though I guess he can't give it 6 because it didn't happen in the Tokyo Dome. But with the individuals involved, I'm sure he'd have no problem making excuses for the Beta Bucks or Kenny Omega, or virtually anybody else in that match. You know, it's actually kind of silly to think about. The idea that I'd basically be able to come on here and predict how the major wrestling journalists are already going to talk about that match before it ever actually happens. And then when it's over, I could confidently say, oh, there's no way they don't try and argue that's 5 stars. And you know, I'll say this because it's not just Dave Meltzer that's the problem. I don't know how often I've talked about this before, but one of the big reasons I subscribed to the Wrestling Observer, the Figure 4 website years ago, was that I really liked listening to Brian Alvarez. Back when he had his head screwed on straight and wasn't a complete shill for AEW's product. If you think I'm kidding, go back and listen to archive footage of him on YouTube. You go back and listen to his old TNA recaps he used to do with his buds, or listen to the Crockett reviews he did a few years ago when they were going through old WWE Network footage. I mean, he was essentially preaching a lot of the stuff I bitch and complain about with today's product. How everything guys do are moves. There's no psychology to the way people work matches anymore. Everyone's caught up in trying to work hard and bump instead of paying attention to the things that actually matter. Seeing that Brian Alvarez compared to the soft gray-haired pardoning AEW soldier he's become now, it's a damn shame. And that's when I decided the juice wasn't worth the squeeze anymore. Why am I paying a subscription service to a wrestling outlet that no longer values the same things that I do? That's going in the polar opposite direction. I mean, the AEW reports are very eye-opening if you take into account how guys like Brian or Dave review those shows compared to how they used to butcher companies like TNA, or in the case of Brian's solo reviews, the Nitro reviews or the Crockett TV reviews or the WWF Raw reviews from the Attitude Era. For literally doing the exact same stuff. Meaningless matches, god-awful storytelling, nothing but forgettable dives and spots, no psychology to anything that happens in the ring. It's all the same. Wrapped up in a ball. And all because they have close ties with the people that are in charge of that company. You're never going to hear them point any of it out. They'll keep running their CNN, MSNBC coverage of AEW until the day it goes under. And all the rational, sane people that actually see what's going on, that don't have the blinders on, they're the ones that'll keep speaking truths. I mean, you even read it in the headlines for videos and articles. You go to the Wrestling Observer YouTube page, and one of their upcoming video titles is Blood and Guts was not boring. So in other words, they can't just outright say it was garbage and everybody knows it. No, instead, they have to teeter-totter around the subject and give it a corporate spin. Because, they can't just outright bury it. So they have to do it that way so they don't piss off anybody. Well, the one thing you can say, just to put a positive spin on it, may not be for everybody, but it wasn't boring. Sure, it made no sense, went way too long and killed the business in more ways than one, but it wasn't boring. Smile. Thumbs up for the camera. Nothing to see here, folks. Yeah, we're not getting paid by the company to put a positive spin on just about everything we talk about. Give me a break. Bought and paid for. That's what the Wrestling Observer is in 2023. And trust me, if you think the Blood and Guts match was the only problem with that show, oh, just you wait. Just you wait. Boy, do I have a bone to throw you this week. If you thought I was biased towards some of the people I like on this channel, wait until we get to that MJF segment. I'll tell you what I really think. Anyway. Oh, God. Should we do this? I guess so. Y'all know what time it's for. An AEW specialty. Blood and Guts. No. Just doesn't roll off the tongue the same way Regal used to say, War Games. But Blood and Guts was certainly apropos for the atrocity I witnessed on Wednesday night. There was a lot of blood. Guts were practically scattered all over the ring by the time it was over. It was quite the experience. Many brain cells were lost, but I think that was more so on my end than it was the people involved in the actual match. We'll certainly talk about it later on, but first we need to cover some of the other horrors that perpetrated on this television program on Wednesday. The first of which is Jungle Jack-Off Perry degrading the legacy of Beethoven 5. Of all the classical symphonies to borrow as theme music, and they settled on that? Did Tony even bother listening to the rest of the first movement before he signed off on it? Or did he just listen to the opening excerpt and say, ooh, that sounds daunting. Let's go with that. Dude, come on. They could have fucking hired me to sit in a room with Tony for 5 minutes. I could have picked a better piece for him to use. Any of the Shostakovich symphonies? 5, 10, 11? Mahler? His works are heavier and darker than Beethoven. It wasn't fitting at all. And the people just sat there in silence the entire time the dude was coming down to the ring. No one reacted. It's like everyone was thinking, hey, that's a pretty little piece of music right there. Rather than boo this man, I'm just going to sit back and listen to the nice melodic lines. Like everyone's getting ready to go listen to the New York Philharmonic. Actually, they were in Boston, right? Now, Boston Symphony Orchestra is really good, too. They're like one of the top 5 in the country. I think I have a couple copies of Tchaikovsky works they recorded from like the 70s. Vinyl records. The good old days. So anyway, the bottom line, this music sucks, and they need to change it immediately. And by that, I mean either switch it to a classical work that is more befitting of douchebag Jack Perry, or just hire someone to come in and record a hip-hop tune. Something equivalent to Hook's music. And to tell you the truth, by the time the bell rang for this thing and I actually started watching Hook and Jack Perry wrestle, I was kind of wishing they would have just played the entire Beethoven 5 symphony over the sound system. Because it probably would have been better than this match. And it sucks. I will be the first guy to tell you that I've been really needing a change-up in the Jungle Boy gimmick for a long time. It's old, it's tiresome, it's run its course, and I think it's been pretty well established that Jack Perry is one of the most insufferable pricks working in that company right now. So by all accounts, the heel turn should have worked with him. And then we actually saw him try and talk as a heel, and he sounded even more rehearsed and phony than he did when he was a bland babyface. And the whole thing with him and Hook, first off, they did virtually nothing with those two when they were a tag team. I think they worked like a subtotal of 3 matches before they split off and went their own way again. Then all of a sudden they were friends on camera like 2 weeks before Jack Perry decided to turn on him at the Forbidden Door pay-per-view and leave him for dead. And the fact that this was all so haphazardly thrown together last minute, on top of the fact that it's a middle card feud for the FTW title of all fucking belts. Come on. Is there a more meaningless belt in that company right now than the FTW Championship? A belt that the company has acknowledged from their own lips, we do not recognize this as a legit championship. Okay, so first of all, why should I care then? And second off, yes, I'm aware that there are a bunch of Ring of Honor championships that are of equal or lesser value than the FTW title, but let's exclude those from the conversation. The match was just kind of there, if I'm being honest. The crowd tried to pretend like they were healing Jungle Boy at various points, but a lot of that just came off really forced. It wasn't like genuine crowd heat. It was the artificial, we know we're supposed to boo you because you're a bad guy now, so we'll just play along even though we're all kind of in on the gag. Of course, they fought to the floor within a matter of seconds. It also spilled into the crowd. Jack was trying to work like a heel at points. But again, it all goes back to the believability factor. Yeah, I guess my big issue is, I look at him in this new heel role, but nothing about him looks all that different. I mean, he changed his ring gear from the short trunks to the all-black leather pants, but he still has the long hair. He still kind of wrestles the same style. I guess just toning down all the flashy offense because technically he's not supposed to do all that stuff when he's a bad guy. I just don't buy a lot of it. I also didn't buy a lot of the layout to this match. Obviously these guys are green, so I can't expect them to have the cleanest or smoothest match in the world. But again, it boggles my mind how little agenting goes on in this company. All those veterans that Tony hired, and not one of them ever sits down with these young guys and says, Hook, if you're going to take a draping DDT off the apron to the floor, don't just fire up less than a minute later and start making your fucking comeback. Or, Jack, if you're going to do a fucking DDT on the floor, can we at least make it the finish? Nobody thinks that to themselves? How is it that I think of that on the spot after seeing the move happen? Jungle Boy gives Hook a DDT on the floor. I say, okay, that's got to be the finish. No, they just go in there and keep doing shit. How? It's the small, subtle things that always get me with this company. No one knows how to structure a match in AEW. Or if they do, they don't care, and that's a bigger problem. Everything is, let's do a million things, do every move in the book that we know how to do, and go home with a flat finish that comes out of nowhere and makes no sense. And do we really need the fucking ref bump in the opening match on the show? Much less all the overbooking that was attached to it. I mean, if you're going to do the belt shot deal, you can find ways to blindly distract the ref without knocking him out cold. Weren't people raving about the fact that AEW was so awesome because they never do ref bumps in matches? Now we've seen ref bumps on virtually every show for the last 3 months. Is Tony on another one of his fad LSD trips? Whatever. Jungle Boy Jackoff Perry won the FTW title. Good for him. No one cares. And also, just in case you needed a status update on whether or not Alex Marvez could believably act on camera, the answer is no. He's still the fucking shits. But those are the perks to being friends with the EVPs. You can be absolutely rotten at everything you do, but you'll have a job for life because the higher-ups like you. He certainly isn't MJF or Adam Cole. At least I can openly acknowledge those guys are intentionally doing bad comedy. I don't doubt for a second that Marvez actually thinks he's doing a good job. He's actually trying to be serious. Cole and MJF know what they're doing is fucking stupid. They're just hamming it up to the nth degree. Now, I'll talk about the Blind Eliminator tournament in a bit, but they filmed another one of their goofy pre-tapes, this time at a Chinese restaurant, because, I guess MJF has a fear of spicy foods. News to me. I didn't know that. When was that ever acknowledged on TV? Or is that just some insider joke that went completely over my head? Well, in any case, the joke was that they ordered some kind of teriyaki nugget plate, and when the waiter went to bring them out drinks, they did not take into account that it was alcohol and not water. So at best, I can say they pretended to be drunk. It was clear as fuck that Adam Cole's never had an alcoholic beverage in his life. MJF, he was a little more believable at pretending to be hammered, but he just may be that good an actor. And the punchline at the end was them double clotheslining the waiter because, well, they got to get that finish over, you see. It's about to come in handy a bit later on. By far, the best was MJF doing his dramatic Hulk Hogan impersonation. Talking about body slamming the 670-pound Big Bill last week at the Saskatoon Silverdome in front of 95,000 Maximaniacs, brother. And every time he went back to tell the story, he'd keep fudging the number to making it bigger. I think he ended up at 99,000. Good old inflation. Now, that was at least an insider rib that even Hulk Hogan could laugh at. The fact that he's a chronic pathological liar and everybody knows it. Maximaniacs. Had to mention that a second time. It was so absurd. And then Britt Baker beat some chick named Kayla Sparks in about a minute. Blink and you miss it short. So by default, that probably means it's the best AEW women's match in company history. What was the point of it? I guess to give Britt a TV win? Because, she needs those. And that brought us to the Blind Eliminator Finals. Danny Garcia and Sammy Guevara versus Adam Cole and MJF. With Chris Jericho on commentary. But we're not going to talk about that. I've been stewing over this one for the last couple days. Didn't even really know what to make of it by the time the final bell rang. All I can say is that I'm glad when it did. Because the final bell was probably the best part of the entire segment. Because you know what that meant? It was over. So in addition to Cole and MJF now having matching ring tights and matching jackets, they've also mashed their theme music together, which was rather odd. Cute, but odd. And the first thing I actually wrote down when I saw these guys walking down the aisleway together, I said, man, the crowd's really digging this team right now. Just a shame that MJF's going to turn and beat the shit out of Cole next week on Collision. But that's kind of AEW's forte, isn't it? Things start to naturally and organically get over, and Tony has a habit of squandering it because he has no clue what he's doing. Should we go down the laundry list of items and talk about everything that Tony Khan's fucked up? I wish I had another hour and 45 minutes to do so. Cole and MJF as a team, regardless of whether or not I like it, it's probably the most over thing in AEW right now. On either show, as great as Punk is, the fans aren't universally popping for his segments like they are at the Adam Cole and MJF segments. The reason I don't like it is that A, the end to the story is extremely predictable, and B, the only reason they're doing this is to keep MJF preoccupied with something because they don't have any other credible title challengers for him at the moment. So instead of trying to build up to the MJF Cole rematch in a way that keeps MJF as a despicable heel on television and Cole as the crowd-favored babyface, now they're just bum-fucking around by throwing their world champion in meaningless TV matches with underneath schlubs. Also making Adam Cole out to be the world's dumbest fucking babyface when MJF turns on him and leaves him for dead. And Cole never sees it coming. You know, the more I watch of it unfold, it's almost like too predictable. To the point where they might have to actually go with the swerve and put the straps on them. Just to throw everyone off scent. Because we all smell the finish coming a mile away. I mean, they got Roddy hanging on the periphery. He's still kind of up in the air about the whole situation, but God, I hope they have something better in mind than what we all think is coming. Not to spoil the finish of the match or anything, but yeah, Cole and MJF won. And it was truly something special. Look, I've already reviewed the last couple matches these guys have had. They're blatantly comedy matches because MJF is trying to idiot-proof everything as much as possible. He's AEW's most valuable asset. He can't afford to hurt himself or risk injuring himself doing stupid shit, or more likely the case, feeding for other people's stupid shit. So he and Cole are deliberately working WWE-style matches. They're slowing everything down, working more comedy angles, not doing more than what's absolutely necessary. So I can't fault them for that. I hate the comedy shit, but in terms of working smart versus working hard, I'm all for working smart in this case, especially for the kinds of matches and opponents they're getting paired up with. With that said, the dance-off thing. You know, there's a lot I could say about it. I wasn't happy about it, I can tell you that much. But like, oh, okay, let's argue this. Even if it was MJF's idea, what purpose did it serve in the context of this match? Has it ever been established that Garcia and Guevara were AEW's Disco Inferno? To my recollection, I've never taken Daniel Garcia or Sammy Guevara as the geeks who enjoy dancing. So not only was this incredibly insulting and stupid, but it also made no fucking sense. And while I'm definitely looking forward to another grumpy old expert's opinion on the subject matter, mainly in that I'm interested to see whether or not he roasts MJF for partaking in it, to tell you the truth, after all that hot steaming bullshit I was forced to suffer through in the final hour, God, the dance-off here wasn't even the most insulting thing on the fucking show. Because at least that only lasted 60 seconds, as opposed to 60 goddamn minutes like Blood and Guts did. All I'm going to say is this. MJF is your world champion. He's supposed to be your top guy. And I know we're not supposed to compare or contrast AEW with past generations of talent, but if you ever saw shit like this with Ric Flair, or Dusty Rhodes, or Steve Austin, or Hulk Hogan, or Bruno Sammartino back in the day, you may as well just pull the curtain back and have Vince go out there and say, "Folks, this shit is fake after all." But at the end of the day, here's the unfortunate thing. With the amount of business exploitation we've seen on AEW TV for the last fucking 3.5 years, was this even the most visually insulting? Football fuckery, Matt Hardy teleporting, every House of Drek blackout sketch. On the insult scale, the dance-off would probably rank somewhere around a 3 or 4 in comparison to all the other horse shit I've seen with this product. But I honestly don't even know what else to say. I'm stunned MJF would have even volunteered to put himself in that situation. The Jericho sing-along was probably the last thing I remember him doing that I absolutely detested. I've not been a fan of certain things MJF's been involved with in AEW, but in terms of like off-putting, visually insulting things that I've seen him do, this was probably up there with the Jericho shit. I really wouldn't expect anything less from the other three. Even Cole. I'm old enough to remember when he was jacking off with the company mascot for 6 goddamn months. He's just as guilty when it comes to allowing himself to be involved with all the horrible outlaw bullshit we see on this show. He's still friends with a Cucamonga cocksuckers. And honestly, why stop here? If MJF's on board with all the garbage too, why not just have him wrestle Orange Cassidy in Wembley? How long is it before we see him end up getting paired with him? Having to work a 6-month program with that disreputable sack of snake feces. You think I'm kidding? Look at the way Tony Khan's booked him. You're going to sit here and argue he doesn't have something bigger in store for Orange Cassidy down the road? Are you kidding me? Am I just meant to believe that this is MJF's cognitive way of indicating that he's also given up and no longer gives a shit? I know he works for a garbage wrestling company, so maybe he's just decided to go all in with the BS now. Just tapping out and saying, I know I'm the world champion, but at this point, I'm just here to cash a paycheck from billionaire Tony. And that's fine if he is. If he's phoning it in, whatever. I don't blame him. But the message I'm reading right now as a fan is that MJF is okay with being involved with the outlaw comedy. Even if the whole thing's a swerve and he's hamming it up as a babyface just to be a dick, none of that matters if MJF is allowing himself to be involved with the worst of the worst when it comes to the things that outright mock this profession. Things that blatantly go above and beyond to expose wrestling and make it look like sports entertainment mud show shit. And you know what? I actually shouldn't even throw sports entertainment into that conversation because even Vince would not have allowed his top guys to do stuff like this. Even during the hokiest and childish moments of rotten WWF circa mid-late 80s or early 90s, you would never see main event world champions in WWF have random dance-offs in the middle of their fucking matches. Hogan, Savage, Warrior, Brett, Shawn, Yokozuna. You name the top champion during that time. Bob Backlund. You kidding me? You think Vince would have ever signed off on that? Maybe the Doinks and the Men's on a Missions of the world. But you know what the difference was between Doink, Men on a Mission, and those other guys I just listed off? Doink wasn't a fucking main event guy. Men on a Mission was not a main event team. They were underneath cartoon acts. Deliberately. And I always think to myself in certain situations like this, what would Vern Gagne have done? What would Jerry Jarrett have done? What would Bill Watts have done? If Lawler or Dundee were doing blatant dance-off comedy segments in the middle of serious wrestling programs, do you think those guys would have been long for the business? Bill Watts? Jesus fucking Christ. He'd have fired, stretched, and probably killed any of his top main event guys in Mid-South that tried to pull off a stunt like this. I wouldn't even want to see the ring mat after Watts got through with them. And what's the end game now? I'm supposed to look forward to Cole and MJF versus FTR for the tag belts on Collision the week after I just saw MJF have probably one of the worst performances I've ever seen him do since the bad comedy with Jericho. God forbid they actually try to play this thing serious. God forbid they try to develop an interesting storyline where Cole and MJF spend several weeks working tag matches and they somehow grow to start getting on the same page. They may not like each other, but they end up finding their chemistry as a team just by being two great singles performers that try to one-up each other during their matches. They're not using double team moves. They're blindly tagging in and out, constantly trying to yell at each other and play the one-upsmanship. Yet somehow they always find a way to do the slip on a banana peel finish and find a way to win. Without trying. It's the tag partners that don't like each other but still find a way to win because they're that damn good. There are ways of crafting a story like that. But now they're just doing deliberately bad comedy and trying to make a mockery of the whole thing. And it's fucking stupid. Speaking of fucking stupid, guess what time it is? And we were going to have to talk about it at some point. And after a string of horribly contrived, phony-looking fake pro wrestling, guess it was only fitting that the Blood and Guts match be the main course meal for this fiasco. It's the Elite versus the BCC. Round... whatever fucking number we're on. Feels like installment number 72. A feud that's been going on for 72 years and never ends. By the time the dinosaurs came and went, the Elite BCC feud was still going on longer. And how lovely. A feud between two alleged rivaling factions that's been going on for eons and eons. And of course, the very first fucking spot. It is a collar and elbow tie-up in the corner with Claudio and Kenny. They locked up in a professional wrestling grudge match. A War Games match, no less. The first spot is a lockup in the corner. I immediately turned on this thing and we weren't even 5 seconds in. Little did I know what was to come. Now, of course, the obvious question right out of the gate, as a fellow connoisseur of classic wrestling, traditionally War Games have coin flips to determine who gets the team advantage for the actual War Games part of the match. And of course, we all know that once everybody enters the cage, the match transitions into the match beyond. And because I expect no less from the idiots involved here, the idea that they would even bother going back to watch an old War Games match to figure out how all this is supposed to go, God forbid, that might actually motivate them to try and work this like a classic War Games match before they try to gimmick everything up and make it a modern-day bloodbath hardcore clusterfuck. So did they ever bother to explain how the team advantage worked? Did they ever shoot an angle on TV or book a team captains match to figure out whether or not the babyfaces or the heels would get the advantage to enter the cage? Not to my knowledge. They didn't. Claudio and Kenny are in there doing spots for the first 5 minutes until Pac just randomly comes out and joins the match. And it actually took me a few seconds to figure out that Pac was teaming with the BCC. I didn't even put two and two together that the Elite were the babyfaces in this feud. Both teams are entirely unlikable. I will say, side note here, at least they were smart enough to figure out the 5-minute opening round rule. And speaking of Pac's entrance, this would probably be a good time to mention the goofy setup they had for the BCC entrances. So obviously they had 2 rings set up. It's another staple of the War Games gimmick. But for whatever reason, they decided that they were going to have everybody layer in from opposite ends of the building, which meant that the baby faces were going to enter from the aisleway, and the heels were going to enter from the crowd, coming from, I don't know, I guess the parking lot. Because we all know Moxley likes to make all of his entrances to the crowd. And, well, as you may know, whenever the BCC come through the crowd for TV matches, they usually take a while. I mean, they essentially have to file through a bunch of rabid fans who are constantly getting in the way and blocking pathways. So for whatever reason, they decided to give the heels the longer pathway down to the ring. So anytime the babyfaces were working over one of the heels in the match, the next heel to enter would take like 8 hours to get to the fucking ring, all because they had to come through one of the side tunnels, walk around a giant sea of people on one corner of the arena. Also, they could go down another side aisleway, wedge through a narrow barricade opening, and then enter the cage. Meanwhile, all the babyfaces had to do was run down the aisleway and boom, they were in the cage. Just like that. Took 3 seconds. Took the heels 8 months. Seems to me that the heels were at the real disadvantage in this match, despite the layered entrances. God. The Elite had enough time to leave the cage, walk to the back, take a shit, and by the time they came back out, the heels would still only be halfway down through the crowd. And of course, as you'd probably expect, things were relatively tame per War Game standards, right up until the point the Valvoline attendant came out and started pouring gasoline onto this engulfed masterpiece. Took a matter of seconds before he's out there whipping out forks and screwdrivers and whatever that black shit was he dumped all over the ring mat. The announcers kept calling it glass. Looked like charcoal to me. You know, I can tell you confidently, it's been a while since I've been to Home Depot, but I've seen plenty of glass in my day. Most glass that I come across is transparent. I don't think I recall seeing black glass at any point. If I did, I must have been hallucinating. But of course, these guys are just freely bumping onto it like it's fucking sand. Half the goddamn pole had already been dropped through it by the time the next entry came out to join the match. Of course, I'm old enough to remember when the glass spot in wrestling used to be the climax to hardcore matches. Even if it was never my cup of tea, at least you knew that if somebody was going through glass, that was fucking it. Now these idiots are out there just casually rolling around in fake glass left and right with no build. Morons. I did like at the one point here, Taz randomly, and as passively as one could imagine, just casually goes, "Guys, Mox is bleeding." And of course, what do Excalibur and Tony Schiavone do? They just laugh. They're like, "Ha ha, of course Mox is bleeding, dude. What, have you been living under a rock for the last 3 years? That's all this fucking guy ever does is bleed. Where have you been?" And that's not even the dumbest thing we saw in this match. The fake glass shards were one thing, but as soon as Mox broke out the bed of nails on that giant wooden board, that's when I just shook my head and gave up trying. I think Mox broke the Richter scale of brain-dead stupidity on that one. He created his own category of stupid. There's people who are on the spectrum. There are people who are clinically retarded. And then there's Jon Moxley, which is a step above all that. Seriously? A giant board with nails My God. And you know what the damnedest thing about it is? I'd like to sit here and say, wow, that's a first in wrestling. But I don't think it is. Remember, wasn't there a thing I saw in TNA years back when they had Abyss running around beating the shit out of people with a giant board with nails in it? And do you remember what the general consensus on that horseshit angle was? Everybody said, yeah, and it's impossible to believe because you can not legitimately use a weapon like that without fucking killing somebody. Lo and behold, here we are. It's All Elite Wrestling a decade later, copying shitty TNA ideas from eras long gone. Boy, is that a shameful thing to be associated with. Now they're just breaking out boards covered in nails and having people take bumps on them. Now the real question is, did they gimmick the board? I don't see how they couldn't. When Mox picked up Kenny and body slammed him on the board, the first thing I said was, so I guess Kenny's entire spinal column is made of what? Fucking iron? Steel? Do they honestly think we're that fucking moronic? And of course, to make the situation even more comical and hilarious, after we literally just saw a man get body slammed onto nails, puncturing his back and potentially killing him, of course, now is the point where they bring out fellow brethren Kota Ibushi, the final entrant for the babyface team. And is he in a rush to join the match and help out his buds? Is he in a rush to go out there and save his best friend from potential mutilation? After he just saw him get body slammed onto, did I mention, a board covered in fucking nails? Oh no. No, he's posing. He's standing up there, just soaking in the heartwarming reaction from the fans. Drinking it in, man. Because he doesn't give a shit. He doesn't care that he just witnessed his friends get slammed onto broken glass and nails, getting jabbed in the face with sharp projectiles, beaten up all to hell and left for dead. Kota said, no, I must come out and do my pose. I must bask in the limelight. Because after all, this is my debut, damn it. I need to make this moment count. Fucking hysterical. Ridiculous. Stupid. But hysterical. And for the record, what was Kota Ibushi's first spot for his AEW debut? Well, that's a dandy question if I do say so myself. Allow for me to explain. His first spot in this match, his first spot in his AEW debut, he gives Flat Wheel Yuta a closed fist punch and knocks him out in the aisleway. Now, I know what you common sense people are saying right about now. The aisleway? What do you mean the aisleway? How the fuck did Yuta get out of the cage? Well, you see, it would appear that he simply walked out. He just walked out of the cage. And for the people asking, you can do that? You can just leave the cage under your own volition? The refs are just happy to open the cage door and allow people to leave freely at any point? Well, yes. It would appear so. Don't ask. I am just reporting on what I saw. That was a thing that happened. And it was at this point, once we came back from our third commercial, I believe, I looked at my DVR time, only to realize, fucking hell, we've still got 20 minutes of this shit left. 20 minutes. And think about all we've seen. We've seen 3/4 of the talent pool get body slammed on glass. We've seen forks used. We've seen a giant board with nails where people took multiple bumps on said board with nails. What else was there to do? Burn someone alive? Skewer somebody over an open fire? I know it's called Blood and Guts. Was Moxley planning on eating somebody's guts? I'm surprised they didn't try to break out a Mick Foley getting thrown off the top of the cell through a flaming table spot. Because the people were chanting, "We want fire." I wouldn't put it past these clowns to try and do a flaming table spot. Yeah, AEW did a couple of those. Remember how those went? So, they're doing shit. And that's me being generous with my analysis. They were doing plenty of garbage. Amidst the plentiful table bumps, tack bumps, nail bumps, and glass bumps, we also had super kicks galore from the Beta Bucks, and a nice array of fake windmill punches during the standoff. Because we're really building to that climax, aren't we? Man, I climaxed before the bell even rang. And the turning point, I guess you could call it, came at the point where several members of the BCC just decided, fuck it, we're done. It started with Pac and Claudio getting into a shoving match, I guess during some miscue spot. I don't remember all that happened, but I remember Pac just randomly grabbing the bolt cutters from under the ring and walking out through the door. So apparently you can't just randomly leave the cage whenever you want. Unless your name is Wheeler Yuta. And then following behind, shortly thereafter, was Takeshita, who I don't even think I mentioned once throughout this entire recap. Don't worry, he was a non-factor. If you didn't know he was involved, he was pretty forgettable. He was just a body amidst a sea of a bunch of other bodies. Really didn't do anything to stand out. But yeah, Don Callis yanked him out of the match, and they powdered. So while Mox was handcuffed to the ropes, the faces all ganged up on Yuta until they choked him out with a chain, and he gave up. Good. Just what the match needed. A flat-ass finish after an hour of non-stop chaos and bedlam. The prototypical AEW cap to a prototypical AEW television show. I mean, what else is there to say? Did you really expect anything else from these numbnuts? It was exactly what I figured it would be. God, the predictability factor of a Jon Moxley match is so see-through, even Stevie Wonder could see it coming. Much less anything involving the Beta Bucks. And it all goes back to the violence for the sake of violence argument. That's all this was. It didn't accomplish anything. It didn't draw one dime or sell one extra future ticket for an AEW pay-per-view or live event. This wasn't the breakthrough moment that'll get people on board with committing to Dynamite again on Wednesday nights if you already weren't sick of all the play-acting shenanigans with the school children. All this did was expedite the process of running off those people for good. You know, even some of the people involved in the match looked like they didn't want any part of it. Not only did Ibushi look completely out of shape and pale, but he looked like he would have rather been anywhere else in the world except for Baltimore, wrestling inside this fucking cage. And can you blame him? He was probably watching this all unfold from Gorilla, thinking to himself, what did I just commit to? The answer is AEW, Ibushi. You committed to a pay-per-appearance for an episode of AEW Dynamite, where you'll never be seen again and nobody will remember you after you're gone. And all the while, the next time I tune into this program, guaranteed that most of the elite in BCC will just be back on the show, barely selling the injuries, pretending like none of it ever happened, and they'll just move on with the next thing. Like a cast of video game characters. That's all this was. So we're still chugging along in our 1987 Great American Bash Tour. We've now been to Atlanta, Greensboro, and I believe Oklahoma, they said. And that only covers a hand-select group of cities. And Tony and David are still bringing us up to date with all the match results. Aside from Dr. Death becoming the new UWF Heavyweight Champion by defeating Big Bubba, we also had a very disgusted David Crockett announce that Jimmy Garvin failed to capture the World Heavyweight title from Ric Flair in Greensboro. And now he's sick to his stomach as he has to announce that Ric Flair, as a result of that match stipulation, will win a date with Precious. And apparently, according to Flair's promo the other week, other nefarious acts on top of that. Hopefully legal. Although it's hard to ever tell with the Nature Boy sometimes. We also had some great quality wrestling on the Superstation this week, including our opening match of Ron Simmons versus Gladiator number 1. Because when you think of great quality TV wrestling, the first match you think to book is Ron Simmons versus a Gladiator. I regret to inform you, after having seen that FTR match over the weekend, this Ron Simmons match, not as elating to watch as the FTR match. My notes read, Ron hit some power moves for a while and then won with a middle rope shoulder block. And he also got to do a brief promo afterwards, putting over Dr. Death's UWF title win in Oklahoma. And he also told the Louisiana and the Mississippi fans to keep their eyes peeled, because Ron Simmons will soon be making his way down to that region. I was actually moderately impressed how he was able to articulate all that after just having worked a match. We hear so many guys try to do promos on this show after they just got done working a match, and they're totally blown up and gasping for air. Ron actually didn't do a bad job here. His message was very clear. So following that bombshell opener, we came back for another instant classic in the making, as we see the Mod Squad pinned up against Alan Martin and that other guy, as I wrote down in my notes. There were no graphics shown for either team. They just went directly into the match after the break. No pitch, nothing. The secondary job guy here was about as unidentifiable as like 90% of the other job guys are. I actually spent more time here trying to discern whether he looked more like a gas station attendant or a creepy high school principal. I determined creepy principal was more plausible. Basher and Hash-slinging Slasher beat them up and then won with the elbow drop. There was a point here where about 2/3 of the way through the match, can't remember if it was Basher or Slasher, one of them directed the other to not go for the pin in order to continue the beating. I immediately screamed. Luckily, the match was over 30 seconds later, so it was all for naught. At which point, right before their commercial pitch, we got a replay of the J.J. Dillon War Machine pre-tape from last week, where J.J. introduced him as the fifth man inside War Games 2. A man that stands 6'9" and weighs 437 pounds. In case you forgot about that little detail. A generic masked guy who was totally not Big Bubba. Nothing would ever give that away. Except for, like, you know, all the facial features. Anyway, half the audio here didn't even work because of the bad feed. so we didn't even hear the full promo. But we already talked about that whole deal last week, so you're not missing anything new. And then we came back for some of the updated Bash Tour footage, one of two major highlights this week. At the top of the program, they showed us brief highlights of the Nikita Koloff-Lex Luger cage match for the United States Heavyweight title. They were building that one up for a while. So we finally got to see the blow-off in Greensboro. And they probably started airing the video about 2/3 of the way through the match. And I only say that because Luger looked like he had literally stepped out of a fucking sauna, just dripping in sweat like a broken faucet. And Luger's working over Nikita for a while. The story they had going here was that Luger was targeting the neck, trying to go after that. For the most part, Luger was in control, right up until Nikita came out of the corner and hit Luger with the Russian sickle. And of course, Earl Hebner was standing in the line of fire, so he ends up going down. And while Nikita's got the visual pin, JJ reaches over the cage with a folding chair and passes it off to Luger. Luger gives Nikita a shot right to the back, ends up picking Nikita up into the torture rack. And by that point, it is curtains for Nikita. He is out like a light. So Hebner ends up awarding the match to Luger, new U.S. champion. And while we only saw probably the last 5 minutes of the actual match, can't deny they were out there working their asses off. I mean, if you really think about that for a minute, the idea that they would book Nikita versus Luger in a cage, two guys that were still green by their own right, you're probably under the assumption that the match was not very good. But whether or not it was, boy, were they working hard. And of course, we're right back to the studio where JJ and Luger are basking in the limelight. JJ out here rightfully claiming that he has never interfered in a match in his entire life. And that chair had little or nothing to do with the outcome of Luger becoming the new champion. Apparently, Nikita was calling for a no DQ rematch because of the phantom JJ interference that totally was not interference at all. Sounds to me like Nikita's bitter. God, JJ was great here. It's every slimeball heel manager promo from the 80s where they believe they were in the right, and everything we saw in the clip was fair and neutral, despite all evidence to the contrary. JJ and Paul Heyman would have been best friends. The perfect two slimy heat magnet managers. God, they would have played so well off each other. And, well, Luger chimed in here with some dialogue, obviously putting himself over as the new U.S. champion, that he lived up to his word, and the Horseman's quest for gold continues. He also had a line at the end here where he said something to the effect of, Nikita's grown soft, he's fallen to the bottom of the ladder, and before Nikita considers demanding rematches, he should go back to the drawing board and contemplate his career. Well, he certainly did. Only took him about another year or two before his interest in the business completely waned. Luger was a fortune teller. He saw the writing on the wall. And speaking of the Russian Bear, Nikita had a pre-taped interview at the Greensboro Coliseum with Tony. I guess this would have aired after the match took place, obviously. And he talked about knowing all the downsides of going into a cage with a bad neck. He knew that he was already in a lot of pain. But it was also a year ago on this day where Nikita wrestled one of his now close friends, Magatie, defeating him for the United States Heavyweight title in their best-of-7 series, which I think was more than 7 matches if I actually go back and look at the timeline. I think they had 8 matches, because one of them ended in a double DQ or something. The point is, the thing that keeps Nikita going, the thing that allows him to fight through the pain, are all the great people and friends that support him along the way. And Nikita's going back to doing heavy training as he gets prepared to go after his USA Championship. And obviously, I'm not doing this justice, but if I look back at it, going through the scope of all of Nikita's babyface promos, this was probably the best one he ever did. Not only was it totally coherent from start to finish, but man, was he so believable in his delivery. By the end of this promo, you knew that guy got fucked 6 ways from Sunday. He's not making any excuses for what happened. Yeah, JJ cost in the match, by and large. But for Nikita, it's about training extra hard in the gym, making sure that the next time he meets Luger for the title, the playing field is even. God, it's a shame he didn't last longer. Nikita was so great, dude. You know, once you get past the fact that his matches were never the greatest in terms of what we saw him do in the ring, the guy was able to command attention in a room like no one else. Even with the broken English promos, you knew that guy meant what he said. Nothing sounds artificial with him. He was the real deal. I think I see why Dusty fell in love with him. He was never winning Wrestler of the Year, but he was just as hardworking as anybody else you were going to find during this period in the business. And God, how's this for an immediate transition? They said, we need to brighten up the mood and be less serious for a minute here. Let's send Handsome Jimmy out there to beat up another job guy in short order. That'll put smiles on people's faces. And that's what he did. He beat up the other gladiator. It was the most hideous 90 seconds of television action I've seen all week in any wrestling promotion. That includes AEW. And at the same time, it was fucking beautiful. Every time I see Jimmy Valiant on this show, I can't help but think. It's actually conflicting thoughts. On the one hand, like he needs to go away and stop wrestling because he's so bad. All of his matches are beyond reproach at this point. But at the same time, he is the only guy that can go out on TV every week, wrestle a negative 5-star match, and still be over like God. It's amazing. It's like, I watch a Jimmy Valiant match, and after it's over, I think, you know, people thought this was real at one point. Yeah. And while we simmer on that, we follow that with a wacky Legion of Doom promo. Hawk, in one of his rare head-scratching moments, begins talking about how, since the day the Road Warriors were living on the streets of Chicago, they've never changed anything about their identities, with the notable exception of trying to buy Levi jeans and Calvin Klein underwear. Neither of which fit, because it was probably the European brand. Okay then. I'm not kidding. That was an actual 30 seconds of dialogue. I got so swept up in it, couldn't even pay attention to anything he said after the fact. I was so fixated on Hawk's commentary about American-made apparel, I couldn't focus on anything else. I actually thought they missed out on a golden opportunity to bring the camera crew to film Hawk and Animal trying to buy Levi jeans. That would have been comedy. Here is the Legion of Doom at your local Walmart in downtown Chicago, struggling to buy pants. Yeah. No, that's the problem with being a pro wrestler. When you have jacked physiques like Hawk and Animal did, yeah, you probably have a hard time finding clothes that actually fit properly. Animal didn't have much to add here. He put over the next War Games match in Miami, told the heels to bring the biggest and baddest competition they have. There was a funny moment, though, when Animal was running down the Horsemen. He's talking about how all of them are top champions in the world right now. That was until he mentioned Arn. And then upon realizing that Arn is currently the only guy in the Horsemen without a belt at the moment, he pauses and goes, "And Arn's a great wrestler too." Whoops. Those moments you realize where you didn't think out your promo all that fluidly. It was at this point where I started to recognize how crummy this show actually was. Then naturally, what match should they pitch to next? But Kendall Windham versus Thunderfoot number 2. I instantly screamed. All those jokes I'd made about how so many modern wrestlers have the body of Kendall Windham. At first I thought I was exaggerating. Then you actually go back and see Kendall in 1987. You realize just how spot on those comparisons are. What a physique. The lack thereof. I wrote down 2 sentences. Kendall did a few moves. He won with the Bulldog. Nothing else to say. And then we got Dusty. Boy, did we get Dusty. This is what you would call Dusty on full hard mode. I can't even say he went out there to do a promo. He went out there and did a fucking audiobook. I timed it. I went back and rewound it from the beginning of the promo until the end. This man talked and 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 talked, literally for like 4 straight minutes. I think by the end, I timed it out at 3 minutes and 48 seconds. Felt more like 3 hours and 48 minutes. But it was literally a non-stop 4-minute rant. And as usual, it's Dusty, so the verbiage is all over the map and doesn't really flow in any way. It's nearly impossible to follow what he's talking about. He's putting over his brothers and sisters in the crowd, putting over War Games, putting over the supporting fans, putting over Crockett Promotions. At one point, I think I heard him name drop their production leader, Tommy Edwards. I'm sitting there going, Dusty, please. Time is precious. We don't have time to sit here and put over the entire fucking planet and all of your close relatives. And eventually, he starts going into a diatribe about Lex Luger, calling out his cheap Foster Grant shades and skin-tight pullovers. To which I snidely remarked, who is Dusty Rhodes to be making fun of what people wear on this program? Wasn't I just sitting here the other week and mocking Dusty for wearing red joggers with a t-shirt and blazer? With a comb that he jammed into his hair 3 seconds before coming out to do a promo? Then he starts burying all the heels for pretending like they're rich and famous, claiming that he's the wealthiest, the most famous son of a gun in this industry. Keep in mind, by the way, as this promo is going on, Dusty is slowly edging closer to the ring apron. Tony is following in hot pursuit. Dusty barely stops to catch his breath at any point. He's walking and talking, just trying to come up with the most random shit to say. And finally, it gets to a point where I think even Tony Schiavone got sick of hearing Dusty talk, realizing that he was never going to get to a point. So he tried to get him back on track by reminding Dusty that he's held just about every major world championship in the National Wrestling Alliance, with the notable exception of the U.S. title. And of course, that directed Dusty to get back on the subject of Luger again, saying if he's got the guts, there's a 305-pound chubby son of a plumber looking to get his rightful title shot. At which point, we were about 2/3 of the way through the promo. And, of course, Dusty just kept talking. Something about Ron Simmons, saying you don't need to dye your hair blonde to become a TV star. I'm guessing that was a Virgil reference. Insider comments. There was something in here about Dixie cups. I have no idea what the fuck he was rambling about. And I'll be frank, at some point I just gave up trying to write anything down and said, please, for the love of God, stop talking. Cut the cord. Go to break. Tony, pull the microphone away. God. This is like the pure definition of time filler. Runtime for the show, I believe, was about an hour. I am convinced that 40 minutes of this program was this one Dusty promo. I could have gotten up to take a piss, pour a cup of coffee. By the time I came back in the room, Dusty still wouldn't have been finished talking. Just droning on and on and on. Literally never saying anything of substance. And I love Dusty, but seriously, what the fuck was this? Between the random topic changes to the WWF insider references, like, do we need all that? I mean, when he's out there bashing Luger and the Horsemen, fine. You know, you're trying to sell war games, you build up some potential feuds down the pike. Dusty and Luger, I mean, that's a notable upcoming feud. But do we really need 30 minutes of him rambling about fucking Ron Simmons or being rich and famous? I was about ready to gouge my eyeballs out by the time this was over. Just literally would never end. I mean, to be fair, I was already kind of over the entire show by this point anyway. The Dusty promo expedited the process. Even the Tully Blanchard promo after the break was a rare misfire. Not that in the sense that it was bad, but it was one of those things where Tully was rambling on for a while, and the longer it went, I just kind of kept tuning it in and out. He's talking about how the Horsemen are slowly capturing all the gold, but there's a missing piece to the pie, and that's Arn, the only Horseman who isn't carrying a belt at the moment. And, Tully's mentioning how it'd be great if Arn could get his hands on the Western States Heritage Championship that, if you already forgot, Barry currently possesses. I wrote down, no. And while he was trying to cut a promo on the Rock and Roll Express, saying that Tully and Arn would make great World Tag Team Champions, he had a Freudian slip where he mentioned how they are going after the Rock and Roll to capture the world's television title. And then when Tully realized that he fucked up, he paused and said, man, I'm so flustered, I forgot what belt I already had possession of. He tried to save it. Now, he and JJ had a great close where they were putting down bets on who would win War Games 2 in Miami. And Tully threw in a great line where he said, make sure it's not written as a check, because the Crockett's have a tendency to cancel those checks when it's inconvenient for them. There's a mic drop for the ages. And then we go back to the ring for another instant classic. Todd Champion and the Italian Stallion versus Mike Force and Dave Isley. This match. This was where I was convinced they gave up trying. When they flashed up the graphic and I saw these names, my first thought was, why did they even bother booking a TV show this week? They should have just given everybody the day off. This will probably go down as the most ineffective, pointless episode of Crockett TV in company history. Stallion went over with a power slam. That's all you need to know. It sucked. Then we came back for Lex Luger versus Rocky King in a U.S. title match. I believe his first U.S. title defense since beating Nikita in the cage. This was more or less the battle of the bodies made of chiseled granite. They said, which underneath guy has the best looking body that would compare to Luger? Hey, that Rocky King fella's still around, right? Let's throw him a bone. They got approximately 2 minutes. Rocky King got like 2 punches in. And then Luger turned it around and beat him with a rack like 10 seconds later. So much for that Rocky comeback. And it was at this point where they aired the footage of the Flair-Garvin cage match. More specifically, the Jimmy Garvin match in Greensboro. This was the match that would not only determine the world's heavyweight champion, but there was the added stipulation that if Flair won the match, he would win a date with Precious. And, I think I talked about this before, how I had, no memory of Jimmy Garvin ever working matches with Ric Flair at any point. Or at least none that I've ever seen televised. Well, they aired this one. And this was one of those matches where Ric Flair said, well, I'm going over. So I'm going to make sure I give Jimmy everything under the sun and make him look like $1 million. He took 90% of the match. We even got the classic ass exposure spot where both guys are climbing the cage. And Jimmy reaches out and pulls down Flair's trunks to expose his bare buttocks. And Tommy Young was so gravely offended by this visual that he not only proceeded to scream at both men to get down, probably so he didn't have to witness this horrific sight any longer, but he also went as far as to reach up and pull Flair's trunks up. That takes some balls. I wouldn't even be that courageous. So Garvin's beating up the guy, seemingly forever. Now, of course, in addition to the humiliation, Flair's also bleeding like a faucet, getting rammed into the cage nonstop. And things eventually take a turn for the worse as Jimmy attempts a leapfrog takeover, and he blows out his knee. And like a shark smelling blood in the water, Flair's right there to initiate the attack. Jimmy's now working as the babyface in peril, trying to fight back from the disadvantage. You eventually get Ronnie Garvin out there to play cheerleader from the floor. In his tie-dyed Henley. Because that shirt had to make a comeback. Hideous. And of course, Jimmy's fighting. The crowd is passionately behind him the entire time, cheering for him to stay alive and fight through the pain. And he gets about as far as going for the brainbuster before the leg gives out again. Flair's immediately there to apply the figure four. At which point, all pandemonium and chaos ensues as we get this incredibly confusing, very tumultuous finish. So Flair's got Jimmy in the figure four, and he's using the ropes behind Tommy's back for leverage. Obviously, he can't see. And while this is all happening, we see a human body begin to scale the cage door from the other side. And I actually had to pause the video to make sure that what I was seeing was actually true. At first, I thought it was fucking JJ. But it turns out when I went back and looked at it again, my second intuition was right. It was indeed a mark trying to hit the ring and attack Ric Flair. Because he saw Jimmy Garvin in this figure four, and he said, I will be there to make the save. I will be the heroic babyface that will step in and stop this atrocity from occurring. Ronnie Garvin ain't doing shit. Precious ain't doing shit. So I will be the savior. I will be the hero. And, well, I regret to inform you, the fan, he didn't get far. He got about halfway up the cage before security were right there to drag this fucker down to the floor and beat the shit out of him. I'm actually surprised he got as far as he did. He was halfway up the cage before they pulled him down. Obviously, this man had experienced climbing chain link fences. And meanwhile, people are screaming and throwing crap toward the ring as Tommy calls for the bell and raises Flair's arm. And I don't think they ever made the official rolling there. I mean, there's all this chaos happening in the background. It's kind of hard to tell what's going on. But I think we can basically chalk it up to a ref stoppage. And we also get the great angle afterwards where Flair tries to pull Precious into the cage, presumably to fuck her. But Ronnie's right there to pop Flair in the jaw and send him scurrying for the hills. They did have a near fatality, as Flair also bumped into Precious and almost came down right on top of her knee. Keep in mind, she's wearing high heels. That would have been a rather miserable experience, I imagine. But, yeah. That was a rather confusing, abrupt finish. And I don't really know what was going on there. Something tells me an audible may have been called. When that fan started climbing the cage and Tommy Young caught sight of it, he took one look and said, "Fuck this, we're going home." Now, to be fair, Flair was going over anyway. So even if they were supposed to stay on that finishing spot for a while longer before the bell, just to kind of milk the drama more, boy, did it get the right kind of reaction. This man, he was offended to see Flair win a date with Precious. He could not bear the sight of it. He did not want to see this man retain, because he knew what the implications were. Talk about protecting your woman. But I'll tell you who was happy about the decision was Ric Flair. He was on a whole different planet for this studio promo, let me tell you. Some may even argue, coked out of his mind. And you may not be that far off. It was either that or he was rocking a major erection. Talking about all the spicy, kinky stuff he and Precious were going to do while they were riding Space Mountain together. I believe among the items he listed off here, I heard lingerie, waterbeds, hot tubs, and strobe lights. The fuck kind of Space Mountain ride is that? Unless they were talking about the real deal. Is that safe to have sex while you're having strobe lights going off? Doesn't sound like a very soothing experience. But that wasn't the peak of the segment. Because then, for God knows what reason, they decided to turn up the kinkiness to a fucking 10. I'm not kidding when I tell you, they actually had JJ bring out a blonde mannequin in black lingerie. To which, in probably the most unsettling moment in the entire history of Crockett Promotions, one of the most odd things I have ever seen as a wrestling fan, Flair began to make out with said mannequin on live national television. And normally, I want to say, only so-and-so could get away with doing something like that. Or, only so-and-so could pull that off. This was a case where even Ric Flair could not pull it off. God could not pull this off and make it watchable. Ric Flair sticking his tongue down a mannequin's throat. On TV. In front of God and everybody. It was, well, beyond the fact that it was astoundingly creepy, it was also long and unbearable. This went on forever. I think it may have went longer than the Dusty promo. It just would never end. They just beat this joke to death to the point where I almost never wanted to watch another episode again. God. They say drugs are a powerful substance. This segment right here. This segment proved that point and then some. Don't do coke. That's the message I got out of it. Tony Schiavone said it perfectly before they cut away. Totally stone-faced. Disturbed out of his mind. He just goes, nothing I can say about that. Word. And then we had the TV main event. As if anything was going to follow that Flair promo. Ron Garvin wrestled El Negro. Can't tell if that was supposed to be a palate cleanser, or if they just needed to kill another 2 minutes of TV time. I don't know, it didn't even go that long. I blinked and Garvin was already sitting on top of the guy after hitting him with a right hand. Didn't even take the time to twist the guy into a pretzel. Ronnie wasn't getting paid by the hour this week. That was a simple in-and-out procedure. Now, we actually had more important ground to cover as we close out the show. Here's Jimmy Garvin, trying to follow up with all the stuff that happened inside the cage in Greensboro. He tells Flair they sign on the dotted line, and they're willing to live up to their bargain, or their end of the bargain. Flair wanted a date with Precious. Well, he got one. But the deal is, Jimmy knows that Flair can't handle a woman like Precious because she's more of a woman than anybody Flair's ever been with. And when the dust settles and Flair has his one-night stand, Jimmy's going to be right there on Flair's doorstep to pummel his face and get back at him. It is not over between him and the Horseman. It's not over between Ronnie and the Horseman. And it's not over until Ron becomes the World Heavyweight Champion. Now, we're coming up on it. That we can't deny. By the way, Precious was great during this promo. Just standing there tucked up against Jimmy. Probably scared for her life at this fucking wild man who literally just came out 20 seconds prior and made out with a mannequin in front of the entire nation. I mean, if I were Precious, I'd be a little concerned. It's, I mean, once you remove all sense of logic and realize this would never happen in real life, unless Flair was okay with going to prison for sexual harassment, it was a good promo. And by far, the last 20 minutes were the best part of the show, no question. You know, the main focus here was following up on the Nikita Luger and the Flair Garvin matches in Greensboro. You know, seeing the footage is always great, especially when you go back and hear those raw crowd reactions. When every single building was deafening and people were on their feet for the entire show. Those were the standout moments. But everything else this week was pretty rotten. It was only an hour. But my God, the first 40 minutes were nearly insufferable. I mean, to be fair, I know a lot of guys were probably not at the studio that day to do promos, whichever town they were at next. I'm sure the bulk of them were already on planes traveling. But I was like midway through this thing when I was ready to powder and walk out of the room. I didn't think I was going to make it. I had a hard time sitting through this one. I think that Dusty promo will forever have heat with me. Just because it went on and had no point to it. Of all the run-on promos I've heard from Dusty over the years, that was one of the most fragmented run-ons I've ever heard him do. Bad show. Really bad show. Now then, here comes the fun part. So remember last week when we reviewed the July 14th edition of World Class Championship Wrestling? Well, turns out I'm a goddamn idiot. I know, take a minute to write that one down. You may need to record that for future reference. I'm trying to think, I've been doing this for basically 2 years consistently now. Wow, has it really been that long? I guess it has. And up until last week, I've been very steady with making sure I kept up to date with my classic reviews. Well, that all basically got thrown out the window because I did not realize until I sat down this week, actually I think it was Tuesday night to be specific, where I realized I watched the wrong fucking episode of World Class the other week. The July 14th edition that I reviewed, that was actually the July 21st edition. And the only reason I caught that was because I looked at the video library more thoroughly. And when I saw the July 28th date, I was like, wait a sec, that seems a little bit off. We're only midway through July right now. And then when I browsed over the most recent episode, I realized the July 14th date didn't have that white line across the bottom of the video cap, which is basically Peacock's way of tracking whether or not a video was recently watched. The July 21st episode was viewed all the way through, but not the July 14th episode. I don't know how I did that. Just wasn't thinking. So I basically had two choices. Do I just skip World Class this week and pick up with the July 28th episode next week? Or do I go back in the time machine and watch the July 14th episode just to keep things consistent? Well, I was already kind of in a foul mood when I got home from work on Tuesday. Figuring I needed a little bit of a palate cleanser, I decided, yeah, why not? Let's watch it. And I should preface this before we get going. The fact that I watched an entire episode of World Class, skipping a week in the process, and I never realized it until the following week, boy, is that really telling about the current shape of this product in 1984. The fact that I could completely miss an entire 45-minute episode, and I never thought twice about it. I never noticed. Nothing seemed off. It's very telling. Very telling. And luckily for me, and this is where the benefit of those encore presentations come in, it's good to know that the July 14th episode really wasn't all that noteworthy. When I actually scrolled through the description for the episode and saw the main event was Kerry Von Erich versus the Missing Link, I was actually relieved. I said, oh, thank God, I didn't miss anything important. Now, with that said, we did get a health update on Chick Donovan, which was story development left over from the previous week. Better known by Bill Mercer as the, quote, Killer Khan Casualty Report. I assume casualty was not spelled with a K. And just for context, in case you did not see the match Khan had with Chick Donovan, I guess it would have been the week prior to this episode in the taping schedule. Killer Khan wrestled a TV match with Chick Donovan, where Khan had done some serious damage to Chick's leg. Turns out that put him in a local medical facility shortly thereafter. Kayfabe. And, well, we were here with Chick and Kevin in the medical room, where Chick is cooped up in the bed with a giant leg cast on. And with those baby blue eyes, he looks right into the camera and explains that the doctor put some bolts and screws into that leg. Says he's in a lot of physical pain right now, but his goal is to get back in the ring as soon as possible. 6 months to a year is the prognosis for recovery. But Chick said he's going to train extra hard and push to get back in the ring ASAP. So he's going to take that John Cena training routine and be back within 4 to 6 weeks. And, of course, he had Kevin there putting over the fact that something's got to be done with that no-good Killer Khan. He's tried to intentionally cripple Kevin and now Chick Donovan. There's no excuse for that in this profession. That kind of heinous unprofessionalism. And, well, he basically said that he's going right after Khan the next time he sees him. I believe the exact quote was, "I'm coming with full head." So he's going to apparently beat the shit out of Killer Khan and give him head at the same time. So there's that. First time I think I've ever heard Chick Donovan cut a promo on this show. Little dry in the delivery, but he was all right. Got the point across. I believed everything he said. I mean, nothing sounded scripted or overly rehearsed. That's very refreshing. Other than Kevin threatening to both wrestle and sexually harass Khan. Good stuff. Not a bad opener. Unfortunately, that's where the show peaked. Because then we come back for Buck Zumhofe and Kelly Kiniski, which I wrote approximately nothing down about. They wrestled for a while. It was hideously boring. I was more interested in Gary Holder joining Mercer on commentary to plug the newly printed copy of Requiem for a Champion, which was the tribute he did to David Von Erich and the Von Erich family. The best part was him telling the fans that the best way to get in touch to get a personalized copy of his book was by sending him a postcard in order to get a free copy. God, the good old days. Telegrams and postcards. Back when communication was so simple. Nowadays we have Twitters and Facebooks and Instacarts. Or Instagrams. Whatever the social media platforms are called. Fucking Snapchats. We need to bring back telegrams and postcards. When you had to physically write shit in. Get the young kids to learn how to properly send mail. Maybe it'll give them an excuse to go outside more than twice a year to get some sunlight. Just to go to the fucking mailbox. For the record, I was curious. So I tried to search online for a copy of Requiem for a Champion. I had virtually no luck in finding anything. Amazon had nothing last I checked. I did find something on eBay for... What was the price? I wrote it down on a notepad here somewhere. Here it is. $82.79 for a booklet. I mean, I get this is ancient history we're talking about, but even I'm not willing to dish out $82 for a D-list author. Anyway, I need to mention this. The most epically horrible spot in a wrestling match I've seen in years. So, well, as you may know, Rock and Roll Buck Zumhofe's gimmick was that he used to carry a giant boombox with him to ringside. So, I guess the idea, his way of hulking up to make his comeback, was to wrestle a completely normal match for about 80% of the time, and then in the last 2 minutes, he goes outside, cranks up the boombox full blast, and then proceeds to run wild and completely no-sell everything from the previous beating he was taking. If I actually had any personal opinion of Buck Zumhofe, I'd probably be more inclined to motherfuck him for exposing the business. But since I have virtually no knowledge of Zumhofe, aside from the fact that he was a certified pedophile, I can't really get too bent out of shape about it. Really can't. It was stupid. But, well, the funny part is he didn't even win the match. Because it just wound up going to a time limit draw. And I guarantee you, whatever music they initially played at the Sportatorium here in 1984, it was not what WWE dubbed over the network. This wasn't even like generic 70s or 80s rock. This is like alternative 90s rock meets The Police. It was horrible. So that was match 1 on the card. Again, good to know I didn't miss much. Aside from the fact that Buck Zumhofe ain't really lighting my world on fire with these world-class reviews. And I know there's much more to come with him in due time. That was at least followed with a relatively good Iceman King Parsons versus Gino Hernandez match. Wasn't great, but it was solid. I do remember covering a lot of Gino's material from the episode we talked about last week. The one I was actually supposed to watch this week. His match, I remember, was nothing to write home about, but he also had a pretty interesting pre-taped interview from his private pool, and he's covering how he legitimately became a dual champion by holding both the Texas Heavyweight and the American Heavyweight title, even though that's still up in the air right now because of a wonky ref call. They gave this match a lot of time, too. I'm not sure if they were intentionally looking to stall for time or if something got cut from the initial card, but I think Mark Lorenz timed the match out at 13 minutes and 9 seconds by the time everything was over. And I'm accustomed to world-class matches having 10-minute time limits, so was there just no time limit for this match? Or did Mark just fuck up with the timekeeping? There were long stretches where Gino was working over the Iceman's leg. It was a more aggressive side of Gino. He wasn't relying too much on the overselling or the old school heat antics here as compared to normal. You got Gino cutting off the Iceman right as he was trying to milk the comeback. And of course he went to bounce the Iceman's head off the corner buckle. And as we all know, that normally doesn't bode well. Driving the Iceman's head into a corner turnbuckle, it's the prelude to the fiery comeback. I did laugh at Parsons' comeback. As Mercer says, and I quote, "A fierce contest between two sculptured athletes," unquote. To which I then responded by asking, has Bill Mercer actually looked at the Iceman's physique? I mean, he's not bashing Booger out of shape, but to say he's chiseled, kind of pushing it. In any case, they wrestled for another minute until the Iceman went for a sunset roll-up, but Gino rolled through and used the Iceman's tights to steal the pin. Because even though Gino played this one mostly straight and did not have to resort to overselling comedy to get it over, he still had to cheat to win. Never gets old. Heel's gonna heal. Is that printed on a t-shirt somewhere? Someone hook up with Pro Wrestling Tees and get that trending. Heel's gonna heal. Anyway, that brought us to the main event. And when you talk about not missing out on anything important, when you're booking a TV main event with the missing link, could you be any more apparent with phoning it in? And literally, here's everything that happened. Just so you don't think I'm intentionally blowing off or omitting anything. The bell rang. Kerry ran wild for about 30 seconds. Link cut him off and went for a series of wacky headbutts. He grabbed a chair on the floor and proceeded to give himself a chair shot to the head, of which he immediately no-sold. Can't really say I've seen that a whole lot throughout my life. And then he did some more choppy-looking stuff until Skandar Akbar hit the ring for the blatant DQ. That was it. The whole thing went like 3 minutes, at which point they did a post-match angle where Kerry absolutely waffled this fucking Link right in the head with a folding chair. If the missing Link didn't have CTE before this taping, he certainly did after the fact. And of course, just to make sure that he proved he was not immediately concussed, he then went out to the floor to grab a wooden chair, where he proceeded to give himself more chair shots to his own skull. Okay, serious question. I know the missing Link has been around for years. I mean, I've seen a lot of footage of him. going back to his run in Mid-South when he was basically repackaged with this same gimmick, whatever this knockoff George the Animal Steel persona was. I've seen like one or two of his matches when he was in the WWF being managed by Bobby Heenan. I know he wasn't around for that long. I've never seen anything from the Missing Link prior to the gimmick repackage. Has this guy always been an unhinged lunatic? Because for as long as I've been a wrestling fan, all the tapes I've ever seen with this guy, I've never understood the appeal. You want to talk about the epitome of wacky cartoon characters that would have fit perfectly in WWF circa the mid-90s? Dude! Here's your poster boy. Could have paired this guy with the Head Shrinkers. And the gimmick is so horrendous. And it's never conducive to making his matches good. I get, like, he was perfectly molded for the Devastation Inc. crew just because of all the goofy personalities Akbar had working with him at the time. But, this Missing Link gimmick. I mean, I can handle the Paul Jones Army level of wacky, but once you start throwing guys into the equation that just endlessly bash chairs against their own heads and oversell and overact worse than Kenny Omega, now you're starting to push my boundaries a little bit. This is like Dungeon of Doom level over the top. I mean, there are things that I can willingly suspend my disbelief for. The Missing Link is not one of them. Everything about him is just horrible. Couldn't work. The gimmick was terrible. Obviously, he couldn't talk because he was a mute. Ugh. Not for me. Much like how this episode of World Class wasn't for me. Again, it's probably a good thing that this was the one I accidentally skipped over. Total nothing happening show with literally nothing of substance. Aside from a 2-minute pre-tape with Chick Donovan and Kevin Von Erich. Think about that. The highlight of the program was a Chick Donovan pre-tape. That's all you need to know. I'm telling you, man. Things are looking really rough with Dallas TV right now. You know, business might not be that bad, but we're starting to enter a pretty dark period with this company. I mean, remove Gino Hernandez from the equation. A lot of the guys that are being featured right now in the talent pool, they're just blech. Buck Zumhoff, Chick Donovan, Kelly Kaniski, Chief Joel Strongbow, the Missing Link. They're just really not my cup of tea, you know? And I know the Freebirds are about to lead the territory for a period of time, so there goes your entire set of top heels. Basically leaving the Von Erichs with slim pickings in terms of who they can feud with. I mean, we're calling it a rough patch right now, but that can turn into a slippery slope before we know it. As we go through the library and approach the end of the year and transition into 85. I mean, I know the Midnight Express come in pretty soon, but it's looking kind of bleak. Things don't get better in the years to come, obviously. I was just expecting we'd have a little more good stuff before the ship totally sank. Anyway. No, there you go. That was a rather different way to review World Class, but hey, at least we talked about it, so we're staying consistent with the library. Next week we'll be back on board, though, and I will make sure that I do not watch the wrong episode this time. Until Monday, guess we'll wrap this one up. Thanks for watching, all. Make sure you stop by to check out the Retro Raw, the SmackDown, and the AEW Collision Report this coming Monday. And I'll catch you all on the flip side. Take care. Peace out.